I'm Catherine Arndt, the Chief of the VLGA Connect Studio. Welcome to today's episode, brought to you by the VLGA, your councillor support network and the national broadcaster on all things local government.
Well, hi everyone. Welcome to VLGA Connect. It's time for the weekly governance update, otherwise known as TGU. And with us, the T in TGU, Tony Raunic. Hello, Tony.
G'day, Chris and Julie and viewers. Great to be with you again.
And the U in TGU, which stands for Uber, is Julie Reid. Hello.
Thanks, Chris. It's nice to be here again.
Could you tell I made that up on the spot?
Yeah, you did. You did.
Yeah. I think we're getting towards the end of the year. We're running out of material. We need a bit of a break,
We're
I think.
never going to run out of material, Chris. Never.
Well, that's very true this week. Lots to talk about. And of course, as usual, all the news comes out just after TGU gets put to bed. No exception this week with the Minister last Friday at Fast Track, the VLGA Leadership Development Day, talking about the proposed reforms to the conduct framework in Victoria, which will come in before the elections next year or in time for. The Minister says there'll be more information by February on which to consult with the sector with a view to legislation being introduced in March. So, Tony, from a legal standpoint, plenty of time there, it seems, to get the process in order before the next round of elections.
Yeah, one would think so, and I think that's a good thing that incoming councillors or councillors who want to run again are aware of what's the context, what will be the regulatory environment if they're elected. And this is off the back of that local government culture project with 140 submissions from across the sector and the community. And the minister sided, I think, with the announcement, the 30-odd councillor resignations since January of this year, 8 appointments of municipal monitors in the last 18 months. So this is a reaction to that. We really need the detail to understand just how impactful these reforms will be, but we understand that that there'll be provisions for mandatory, ongoing training for councillors, which I think is a great thing. A uniform councillor code of conduct, and I guess we're all interested in seeing what that might look like. Will it be, a general statement of values, or will there be some more explicit, thou must not do this and thou must do this, those sort of provisions that I guess allow for a more objective kind of sanction against councillors if they fail to observe. And also sort of stronger powers for the minister, clearly, in terms of dealing with individual councillors who are, causing problems within a council, so that the minister doesn't have to just dismiss an entire council for the sins of 1 or 2 councillors.
So also, Tony, new powers for the Chief Municipal Inspector to issue infringement notices. Can we sort of talk that through? Where within the process of dealing with a matter of conduct do we see that occurring?
Yeah, this is interesting. So of course, there can be complaints to the Chief Municipal Inspectorate about things like misuse of position, failing to deal appropriately with confidential information, failing to declare conflicts of interest, etc. And I think that I would imagine that these sort of infringement notices might relate to some of those provisions potentially, whereas I think that the councillor conduct process sits separate to that. But again, we'd like to see the detail of that. But it seems like a good way for there to be, a public accounting and a sanction for a councillor who does the wrong thing, short of having a suspension or a dismissal.
Julie, the reaction from across the sector has been broadly positive to this. Obviously, everybody wants to see more detail and understand how it would work. Have you heard any negative reaction?
No, I haven't yet, Chris. It's all been pretty positive. I think that drawing a link between this and the culture project has been a really good idea, I think, by the minister, because obviously the culture project finished and then there was nothing, and then it was kind of got handed back to local government to do something about it. So now for her to step in and say, okay, off the back of the culture project, we're going to introduce these measures. I think that's a really, really good and smart way of her, bringing it back to that, because ultimately what we're after is a safe and respectful workplace, aren't we? That's what is coming through in some of the responses that have come from the councils in particular. So we know that there's been a few councils, Glenelg have come out, I think Strathbogie have come out, and rural councils Victoria have come out and basically be generally in support of, the theory of what is proposed.
Yeah. And LG Pro as well, as a big body, said it's very much in line with the recommendations that they put to the Culture Review earlier this year. RCV, one of the big things they picked up on was this ability for the minister to deal with individual councillors rather than having to use that blunt instrument of removing a whole council because of the actions of perhaps one or two, which brings us to the two councils you mentioned, which are facing some form of intervention at the moment. Let's put Glenelg to one side for a second, but Strathbogie is still under this, as we record this potential suspension, with the minister having asked them for feedback on why that should or should not happen. We understand the mayor has responded with the support of some councillors, saying a suspension perhaps is warranted. The Euroa Gazette's been pretty on top of all of these developments, and we've got another one to report in a moment. No surprise, I guess, Julie or Tony, that the councils are responding in that way, given the issues that they've been dealing with.
Yeah, maybe there's some hope by them that, that they can target particular councillors rather than sacking the entire council. But we've seen this week, I think, that Strathbogie haven't been able to finish a meeting due to not having a quorum. So, that's a telltale sign, really, that they are, in a bit of a state that, needs, and they need some assistance, I think, in bringing it back to a good governance situation.
Yeah, so two councillors left before they could run the mayoral election process, which meant they lost their quorum, because, of course, there's two vacant seats on that council at the moment. Glenelg with two monitors in place and two vacancies, and there's a drama about one of those vacancies this week as well, which we'll get to. But Tony, these changes, they're unlikely to be retrospective or in time to deal with these two councils' issues, aren't they?
Well, I absolutely, they won't be retrospective in that sense. And you'd have to say, well, I'm prepared to say, I think the writing's on the wall for Strathbogie Shire Council. This failure to maintain a quorum for the mayoral election. Yes, there'll be another attempt in a matter of a week or so, but it's just another reason in that set of reasons that the minister might use to dismiss the council and appoint administrators. The two councillors that walked out, Councillor Chris Rayburn and Councillor Sally Hayes-Burke, they said, they couldn't support the appointment of a new mayor in the current environment there at Strathbogie Shire. Look, I think, for me, I'd call it as it is. I think councillors only walk out and allow forums to lapse when they don't have the numbers, essentially. And I suspect that they wouldn't have had the numbers for their candidate for mayor, and so they've walked out. And if they had the numbers, I think they're likely to have stayed. I don't think it's a good look. I think from a democratic perspective, if you don't have the numbers, stay, make your arguments, and let democracy sort of take its course. But the Local Government Act's very clear. You've got to have that absolute majority of councillors present for the meeting and for the mayoral election.
And look, I think that, I wouldn't be surprised if in the background there's this working on who's going to be the administrators. This is my guess. I'm not going to put a wager on it, but But my guess would be that there might be some plans afoot in the background to set up who will be the administrators, get that all lined up, ready to go, and then, you know, take it to Parliament, etc. So then there's no delay in that appointment potentially. I've got no inside information on that, but I'm just
no, but I'm sure you're right, and of course, and I'm sure one of the other factors for consideration is how long, if the council's to be suspended or dismissed, for how long would it be under a period of administration? Because we've seen Moira placed under administration for effectively 5.5 years. We're less than 12 months out from council elections. Tony or Julie, are you prepared to call whether this period of administration would go beyond this next election cycle?
Well, you'd have to say, if you look at Moira and the question of functionality in the council, that was, you know, they did have some resignations, but the council was able to operate, was able to conduct meetings, and the councillors were all, you know, cordial towards each other generally. You'd have to say 5.5-year dismissal there, and in this instance, pretty severe things seem to be occurred at Strathbogie. So I wonder whether we'll see any comparability there. I suspect we won't.
No, I agree. I agree. I think it'll be longer. I just have to guess that we'll be looking at a longer period. It takes a long time to recover, I think, in a community when there's been such dysfunction at that councillor level.
All speculation, of course. So
Yes.
we're awaiting some news there. So Glenelg, the other council that's responded and welcomed the changes, not quite as emphatically as Laura Binks at Strathbogie, who said she was thrilled, and it's been awful at the council, and councillors need to be held account for their behaviour, and she welcomed these new measures as being a tool to be able to bring that into effect. But at Glenelg, there's 2 vacancies also. One countback this week where a person was elected through the countback process, but did not return the declaration of eligibility within the 48 hours. So another countback has been held, and we're waiting to hear whether that person follows through and takes their position on the council. Doesn't augur well for the pool or the depth of the pool of candidates, does it?
Yeah, it's a bit of an ongoing saga, isn't it? And I think it would be today that period would expire to complete the declaration of eligibility. So we might find out today, folks, whether we've got a new sitting council at Glenelg, or wow, do we go back to the well again and see who else is out there?
With another countback process to fill the other vacant seat still to come, I think the week after next. So watch this space.
Chris, can I just make a comment on a couple of things that are coming out through the reforms, only because travelling around the state and dealing with a number of different councils at the moment, you know, there's been some really key learnings for me, I think, that I have honed in on. And one is particularly, I think, you know, having more mandatory training requirements, I think, and ongoing mandatory requirements, I think is a good idea, in the sense that I think there's a reluctance for some councils to take on that training, spend the time. They're a bit worried about spending the money, you know, when they're cash strapped in that training space. Look, I've seen some councils are doing some really good work with training of councillors, but there are others that are reluctant because the councillors themselves don't want to be seen in the community to be wasting ratepayers' money. So I think that would help that issue. The other thing on the code of conduct, I think, again, I've had a look at quite a few of them. There's a real mixture of really short ones, and I've heard situations where, you know, governance teams have gone in with longer codes of conduct. You know, they've been stripped right back by the councillors because they don't want to be held to account necessarily, because they're going to sign up to it. So they're a bit worried about, you know, the detail that's in the code of conduct. So I think that there's this real diversity, and I think the governance, what I'm hearing from the governance people across the councils, is that they would welcome, I think, this uniform one that can't be kind of debated around the table, but that, you know, would they have no choice but to sign up to. So just a couple of things on my travels recently, that really stand out.
Yes, it'll be interesting to see how prescriptive the model code of conduct will be, and what autonomy, if any, the councils have to add to that, to change that? Are you seeing it as a minimum standard that will have to be applied, Tony?
Well, that's what IBAC recommended with Operation Sand, and of course that there was an ability to add on, have an addendum, a local addendum, if you like, but it had to be consistent with the template. I'm really interested in do we get to the specifics? No one can argue against, a provision that says, councillors should show courtesy and respect to each other. We'd all agree with that, but it is quite, it's a high level, generic, general, and we really want to get into, I would think, into some specific provisions that detail what councillors ought not be doing and where they ought to be concentrating their efforts, rather than have this debate, what did courtesy mean here? What did respect mean here?
And I think we're getting a number of arbitration cases that are coming through now that are helping inform some of that. So I'm hoping that obviously LGV will be looking at what those cases are saying, no doubt, and thinking about, how that might influence the content.
And shout out to the people who are designing the induction programs, because I know they're already thinking about that, because some of these reforms may have an impact on the content and the timing of some of the elements of those induction programs. Is that fair? Yeah. Okay. So a lot more to come on that, and we'll just have to pick up any developments in our next episode if they come out before then. Another thing that's challenging councils at the moment is their role in responding to the war, the activities in the Middle East, the Israel-Gaza conflict. We've had two examples this week, and I think there's a little bit of a trend out there, Tony, interested in your view on this, of CEOs being really concerned about the health and safety aspects of bringing forward motions about ceasefires, taking sides in the conflict, etc. I'm aware of at least two where the CEO has made a decision not to accept a notice of motion on those grounds, and we've also got a couple of highly publicised ones where they have come through. This is a really difficult line to straddle, I would think.
Yeah, look, it is. And I think, as we've predicted in earlier episodes of TGU, the longer this war goes, the more local communities in Australia are going to get dragged in, because it's impacting on communities who have ties to the area. It's the governance rules of a council that typically, a CEO would look at to determine whether a notice of motion is appropriate or not. Does it get through that filter? According to media reports in the last week, at the City of Greater Geelong, a councillor, Sarah Hathaway, sought to table a motion, calling for a ceasefire. The motion went, of course, a lot further than that, and condemned, certain language from Israeli politicians, Israeli Defence Force members, etc. I think, the decision, at least according to the media reports, was that that the CEO said that she wouldn't be allowing the notice of motion because it might be prejudicial to any person or council and result in an escalation of civil unrest in the community. And she had concerns for, occupational health and safety for council staff, councillors, and members of the public. So, I'm on the record as saying I think the councils are best placed to sort of aren't best placed to agitate in relation to these international conflicts. But I sort of don't like the governance rules being used to quash notice of motion that are controversial. And
from a health and safety, can I play devil's advocate though, Tony? From a health and safety standpoint, if we look at Marybeck, and we've got death threats against councillors who did not vote a certain way, surely that's a pretty strong argument for a CEO to say, I've got serious OHS concerns for councillors and staff if we get involved in this matter.
Do you I think there's another question about whether it's appropriate for council to be involved in this issue. And I think under the governance rules, typically, arguably, motions like this aren't related to the objectives and functions of council and could be ruled out. But I think saying that occupational health and safety is like conceding. You can close the chamber, but I think it's conceding to, all you got to do is someone to get particularly agitated and emotional in the community and be threatening, and we won't deal with an issue. We won't take a position on an issue. And I don't think that's a good approach.
Yeah, good point. Julie, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, look,
you might prefer not to buy into it.
Yeah,
I wouldn't blame you.
This is a really difficult one for me, Chris. I'm really struggling with this, but I only because it's so emotional and such a big issue that is so hard for councils to manage. I'm sort of sympathetic towards the CEOs for making that call. And as long as it can be done under the governance rules, then I think that's possibly a really courageous decision by those CEOs to hold and say, no, this is going to have an impact. And so I suppose I'm sort of feeling that, that kind of decision by them with justification is courageous, but also I think justifiable. So that's my position on it. But it's a very, very difficult one to comment on, I think.
And I think Tony makes some excellent points, but I do also have sympathy for and understand this is one of the things that would be keeping CEOs awake at night in terms of their OH&S obligations, which are pretty serious under different legislation, aren't they?
Yeah.
All right. Just want to mention Maribyrnong has passed a motion very similar to the one that Sarah Hathaway was trying to get up and the one that was passed at Marybeck, fairly wide-ranging. A rescission motion has been lodged next day and will be dealt with, I think, in a few weeks yet, probably next month's meeting. So that one's sitting in abeyance at the moment. Of course, the silly thing, wrong word, while all of this is being played out, the issue itself over there in the Middle East is going ahead in leaps and bounds as we record. There's talk of a temporary truce and release of hostages and a short-term ceasefire, etc. By the time that comes back for rescission at Maribyrnong's next meeting, we hope, fingers crossed, that maybe there's some resolution to this matter.
I just say these motions aren't. They might lead with, calling for a ceasefire typically, but they're going further. They tend to be partisan, if you like, or perhaps a better word is they tend to be, supporting one side over the other a little more, and that's where the controversy arises. I think it's the 12th of December, that ordinary council meeting at Maribyrnong, to consider that rescission motion.
Okay.
And it's interesting, isn't it, Chris, that all of this that we've talked about this morning comes back to, a safe workplace.
Yes.
It's all of it we're talking about is about a safe workplace for councillors and for staff.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, it's some big stuff that we're talking about this week. Another council has had to defer a meeting, in this case just by 24 hours, because it could not maintain a quorum. And this was Brimbank on Tuesday night, did not have enough councillors in attendance. A group, my mail is, and I haven't been able to independently confirm this, that a group of councillors chose not to attend the meeting due to some of the items on the agenda. There were, if you look at the agenda, couple of potential candidates for why that might be. One was a controversial consideration of opening up public forums on I think a monthly basis, and another was adopting a draft LGBTIQA plus action plan. The meeting couldn't proceed. It was deferred to the next day. 6 councillors came, which constituted a quorum. There were 5 apologies, and both of those items were eventually resolved. The action plan was adopted, and the matter of public forums was rejected while a review of a community engagement policy is happening. So I'm hoping we're not seeing a trend here, Tony, of
I'm
councillors, as you
worried
said
about
before,
this.
and you, Julie, as using numbers to
Oh.
block decisions being made on things that they don't agree with or don't have the numbers for.
Yeah, it sort of reminds me. I've forgotten what it's called. What's that thing in America where they just talk all night just to hold up a
Filibusters.
a filibuster? Yeah, it's sort of it's that sort of using procedure to determine an outcome when you don't have the numbers, and I have some discomfort with that, I got to say.
Yeah, I think I've heard of a few stories like this now, and it's starting to worry me that it is a bit of a trend. What it comes back to, I think, is the whole issue of accountability. For councillors to be, responsible to be at these council meetings and show a vote of hands, in front of the community about where they sit on some of these issues. It's about being accountable in your role as an elected member. So I struggle with this a little bit in terms of them just not being at the meeting because they either don't have the numbers or they're just not wanting to show their hand around what their position is on some of these what could be quite controversial issues.
All right, let's hope they're isolated incidents and we don't have too many more to talk about. We mentioned LG Pro before, responding to those reforms being in line with its position that it has received quite a bit of PR for in recent months. LG Pro's board election results are in, I believe. Julie, you were at the event last night for the announcement.
Right, that's why I've got a croaky voice.
What, because you were singing, you were shouting?
It was Robbie Williams the night before, and then talking non-stop at the LG Pro event last night, which, there was a lot to be said and fantastic. And Liana Thompson did a great job of running the annual general meeting. They announced that all of the existing board members were successful in getting back. Obviously, Karen Ellis had stepped down from the board, and they thanked her for her amazing contribution to the board, but also her ongoing contribution across the sector. And there was some newbies added there as well. But look, we'll wait for the announcement. I'm sure the LG Pro are going to put some media statement out today. I don't want to just sort of take the glory away from LG Pro, but it was a great night, and there was lots of positive energy in the room from a lot of CEOs and directors, and lots of things to talk about. And we've got some really strong support from them as listeners to TGU. So that was really great news.
Excellent. And I think you went to an LG Pro event since we last recorded too, Tony, didn't you?
Yes, the LG Pro Women's Conference was on last week, and that was a great event. And look, they do an amazing job. Jill Brown, in the executive there, and Liana and her team on the board, and it's just an integral peak body for the sector, and they, along with VLGA and MAV, I think have been critical in terms of these recently announced reforms by the minister as well.
And I was at the Women's Forum as well, Chris, and it was just so well attended. They must have been very, very pleased with the attendance on the day. A few hundred women there talking about really critical issues and, still, discussing the challenges of equity across the sector. So, amazing event, I would agree, Tony. It was really such a pleasure to be there and sit on a panel.
Now, speaking of, and I agree with all of that, I say, speaking of equity, I understand, and I haven't got the link handy, that the election of Eden Foster, the former mayor of Greater Dandenong, to the state parliament means we're at parity in terms of gender balance in the state parliament, which, if that's true, that's a terrific outcome.
Yeah, I saw that this week in the news as well. I haven't looked at that, looked at the numbers, but I saw that pop up in the news. And look, I believe, she was a good mayor at Greater Dandenong, and I think that she will be a good advocate for local government at the table. So I think this is great news for the sector.
Absolutely. And of course, she will be required to resign. I haven't seen confirmation, but I guess the result needs to be declared, and I haven't seen whether that's occurred yet either. I know they were doing a recheck of the count a couple of days ago. But that, of course, means there'll be a vacancy on the council at Greater Dandenong. That'll be the 29th this year. You know, the minister's commented on there being nearly 30 this year, a lot of them due to conduct and a quote unquote toxic environment. That's not the case with this one, of course, because she can't hold, unlike in New South Wales, both of those roles until the next election. So we'll wait and see what happens there. And I just want to do a plug for an upcoming VLGA Connect. I'm doing a sit down with the VEC Commissioner, Sven Blummel, to talk about preparations for council elections next year. But I'm also going to ask him about this trend of extraordinary vacancies this term and how that stacks up, because we're at, what did I say last time, about 53, 54, 55, somewhere around there for this term of council. Really keen to know if that's normal or much more than normal. I suspect it's the latter.
That'll be a great episode, Chris. I'm looking forward to that one.
Look for it next week, Tony. Now, a bit of news from across the border. The rate peg in New South Wales has been set. We commented a couple of weeks ago that IPART had announced some changes to the methodology, which have been roundly welcomed by the sector. They're taking into account a lot of factors like employee and asset base, emergency services levy, etc., population growth factors. So what it means now with the rate peg in New South Wales is that depending on the council and its population factor, that rate could be anywhere between 4.5% and 8.2% for the 24-25 financial year. Are we taking any bets on the Victorian rate cap being anywhere in that range?
Well, we've seen inflation hasn't moderated, has it?
No.
Pronouncements about domestic inflation. I don't know the answer to that, Chris, but I got to say I love the detailed explanation that IPART publish on their website about their calculation methodology, and really transparent. It's probably worth a look if we put something in the episode notes for people. Yep. But we'd love to see, at least from a Victorian perspective, a bit of a rationale for the government's decisions about rate caps and any changes to those. Because the detail that IPART go into is it's quite significant, and I think it's quite valuable for the sector to understand how these decisions are made.
I wonder, and I'm sure the Essential Services Commission, Julie, would be looking very closely at what IPART is doing in New South Wales.
Yeah, I would hope so, and I'm sure that they are. Whether that'll mean that they'll, up the ante in terms of the percentage this year, I'm not so convinced of that at this stage, but we'll watch that closely, and we know that it's not going to be too far away now that we're going to find out. But look, I agree with Tony. I think it's really well set out, and let's hope that it's a good model going forward for other states.
Yeah. A lot of councils at the moment grappling with special rate variations in New South Wales, which are additional to that rate peg. Some are talking about 50% increases over a 3-year period, which is pretty significant. Of course, they've got to get through the IPART process yet. Of course, there's a similar process in Victoria where you can apply for a variation to the cap. I don't think any councils did that this year with 3.5% the cap in place, which should be said was double the previous year of 1.75. And I think the decision in Victoria is it's usually due by Christmas, isn't it? Yes, so in the next few weeks.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
All right. Watch this space. Let's have a look at a couple of other stories. Tony has alerted us to an interesting trend in Ballarat, where the use of Snap Send Solve, terrific company and app for generating or connecting residents with councils in terms of incidents and issues. Apparently, its usage is significantly up in Ballarat, Tony.
Yeah, and I think it's just a sign of our increasing sort of digital world that we're in, and the need for us to be looking at, different mediums to be communicating with our community, and that interface between council and community. And yes, the use of the Snap Send Solve app has been hailed as a success in the city of Ballarat over the last week. It's been utilised by council for the last 13 months, and according to a report in the Ballarat Courier this week, the Director of Corporate Services, John Hausler, has sort of hailed the growth in its use. So the idea is that instead of residents, complaining on social media about a council asset in disrepair or some graffiti, etc., then what they can do with the app is they can log on, take a photo of the asset in question, pinpoint the location, leave an email address, and then automatically that information gets fed to council and sort of triaged to the right section of council. When this was introduced in Ballarat in 2022, they were looking at about 195 reports a month, and that has escalated now into 2023 to about 500 reports a month. So, 150% growth. Interestingly, according to the report, Julie and Chris, what's the most common complaint or notification, if you like, varies month to month. So sometimes it can be, dumped rubbish, I guess, after sort of periods of festive activity and all that. We have all those boxes and those things. And other times it can be potholes in roads, and I suppose that's associated with weather events and that sort of thing. But yeah, it's just another tool for councils to consider. I'm sure there are other competitors to this particular one, but it's worth councils looking in the marketplace, and it would appear that with our increasingly sort of online community, that this is a tool that the community are going to respond to and utilise.
It's a leader in the space, Tony, without doubt. And in fact, back in my time at Hobsons Bay was one of the first councils to go with Snap Send Solve as a solution. It avoids councils having to build their own app and basically reinvent the wheel. And I notice a lot of other councils around Australia are coming on board in a partnership with Snap Send Solve, which is great to see.
And it's used by staff and CEOs as well. I remember we had it at Kingston, and I was a local resident of Kingston, and I was Snap Send Solving on a regular basis.
You're not alone there, Julie.
They must have gone, gee, that Julie Reid, she's creating work for us.
No, good story.
To use internally, and for people that work and live within the municipality, they can use it to assist as well, which I think is great. Yeah.
Well done to Ballarat and Snap Send Solve. Julie, you're keeping an eye on this water amendment bill that's coming up in the federal parliament. The Murray River group of councils has been pretty strong on advocacy here, and not liking what I'm hearing, though, in terms of where this is likely to go, and I don't think they are either.
No, that's right, Chris. And it's an interesting one. I don't really understand it in full, so I'm really interested in learning more about it. But the Murray River group of councils are obviously working together. The Campaspe Shire Mayor, Rob Amos, has been talking about this at his recent visit to Canberra. There's a really good link. We'll put the link on the show notes to his concern. This is the water amendment Restoring Our Rivers bill, and they're talking about this buyback scheme and the fact that the government are going to remove the socio-economic impact test from the legislation that is currently there at the moment. And he's worried, and the councils in particular, Gannawarra, Loddon, Mildura, Swan Hill and Moira, are all worried about the impact that's going to have locally on the economy. So I think it's one to watch, and certainly would be interested in learning more about the implications for those councils.
Yeah, so they're very concerned about the implications on the food production from the food bowl of Australia as a result of that going through. So one to keep an eye on. The other one I know that you've all noticed of recent time because it's got a lot of attention is the Grattan Institute's report on roads called Potholes and Pitfalls. I refer you to a special edition of the Local Government News Roundup from last week where I speak at length with one of the authors, Marion Terrell, about that report. The good news is its headline finding was that $1 billion a year was needed through the federal government just to maintain what we've got now, let alone trying to get any further ahead with the road network. And the government's followed up on that and announced that it will increase the funding amount to $1 billion a year. Catherine King made that announcement last weekend. So that's a very positive sign.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's really, really good news. And on my trip out to Horsham this week, Chris, I was very concerned with the state of the roads. And I know that the councils out there are advocating very strongly for that. So, fantastic news. Really good.
Yep, more money for roads to recovery, more money for black spot funding, a few other measures in there, and a pledge, I think, to work more closely with councils around how that money can all be applied. So we'll keep watch on that, and just well done to all those who've been advocating in that space for a long time to get such a significant outcome. That is terrific. Before we wrap up, there's a couple of overseas stories I wanted to get your thoughts on, Tony and Julie. I'm going to start in Canada, where a group has called 7 councils to account for continuing to include a prayer at the start of their council meetings. They're saying it violates a Supreme Court finding from 2015, which requires neutrality. They say it's divisive because it's not inclusive of people who don't share the faith of those who are reading the prayers, etc., and doesn't reflect the diversity of the community. We've seen some debate here about the inclusion of prayers, Tony. We haven't got a Supreme Court ruling like that, I think, to call on. But is it just a matter of time before someone seeks some sort of legal ruling on the use of prayers at council meetings?
Oh, you're probably right. I think probably someone might test the waters, which would have significant implications across a range of sort of government chambers in Australia. From the federal, state, and local government chambers. It's about, for me, it's about this. It's secularism, and the secularism was this sort of championed sort of in the modern age in the 17th, 18th century, but people like Thomas Jefferson in the States and George Holyoake in the UK, and it was about avoiding this exclusionism. So there were rules that said you couldn't hold senior public office. You couldn't be a judge. You couldn't be you couldn't be a member of a council, for example, if you weren't practicing a Christian religion. And in fact, it was typically a particular denomination of the Christian faith. Often in the UK, it was the Anglican Church. And people who didn't practice that faith were excluded from holding office. Atheists were excluded from holding office. And I think rightly secularism championed removing those restraints and opening up opportunities for people. For me, it's sort of flipped on its head a little bit now, the way we interpret secularism now. It's like saying we won't have any, it's excluding any sense of religion in government. So I personally think a general prayer to Almighty God that covers Muslim and Jewish and Christian sort of faiths is still quite inclusive. But I know there are different views about that. But I think that we as a councils often do things that not everyone agrees with. So for people to say, having a prayer is problematic for atheists, we don't say, and I agree, I think acknowledgement of country is a great thing, and I'm a supporter of that, but not everyone in the community agrees with that, and yet we persist with it. We don't say, because there's people in the community who don't agree with that, we better not do that at council. We better not be official about something that some people can't connect to. And yeah,
Tony's being very logical and sensible today, isn't he?
He is.
Yeah, I'm on my high horse now, aren't I? But no, so I've got some views on this. clearly.
We can tell. And
Tony,
Julie, I want to take this neutrality thing a step further. In Montgomery, in Alabama, the council there has banned all flags, signage, materials that from council property that could be seen as in some way not neutral. And this includes Christmas decorations.
Christmas decorations. They're banning Christmas decorations. They're going to get a lot of flack from this.
Well, the mayor there doesn't agree, and he vetoed their original decision. But now the council's overridden the mayor's veto, and it can't be undone except by another resolution of the council. So it's a fait accompli. No Christmas decorations in Montgomery, Alabama this year.
And you know what? It's only 1 month till Christmas. So if they're going to change that position, they're going to have to be pretty quick. Yeah, look, I just...
You're shaking your head? Is that a head shaker?
I'm shaking my head. I just,
Can I then give you both the ultimate head shaker to finish on?
Yes, please do.
This is in Michigan in the US, where the council there at Flint City has tried to make its council chamber, the city hall, a gun-free zone. That seems pretty reasonable to me. We don't want guns in the council chamber when we're running council meetings. A judge has injuncted them from enforcing that because they've interpreted that the Open Meetings Act, which requires council meetings to be open to the public, requires people to be able to freely bear arms if they wish, because there's a constitutional right to do so in America. This has got me. I've been shaking my head about this for days.
Well, Chris, when you think sometimes that, you look at the state of governance sometimes in our country, and sometimes we get a bit perturbed by things we see at some councils. But I've only got to look across the water to the USA, and we've realised just, how lucky are we? We are so much better off than they appear to have it there.
And I think we should just end on that note, because that is just a beautiful reflection. Thank you, Tony.
Okay, I think we're done. Thank you, Tony, for the win this week. Not that your contributions weren't terrific as always, Julie. Thank you both. Have a great week, and we'll look forward to having you back next week for more TGU.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And thanks to you, our viewers and listeners, for continuing to listen to this. I was going to say drivel. This very considered discussion every week on the issues of the week from around the world of local government. We'll see you again soon. Bye for now. Bye.